Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show, where we help you make the wisest and most profitable decisions. And today we'll help you make the wisest and most profitable decisions about how exactly to return to the office most effectively. This is an important question, especially with the Delta variant surging and making things even more difficult for the return to the office. So, how do you approach the question of returning to the office safely and effectively and in a way that aligns with business objectives and employee desires, and in a way that you can make sure that you get the work done that you need while retaining your employees and keeping their morale high? That's what you want. That's what we want. So let's talk about how that can be accomplished. First to realize is that the office of the future is not a throwback to the past. You're not going to succeed if you're just going to do Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. The hybrid office of the hybrid workforce is the future. That is the future, and that's what you want to show and orient toward. We have a lot of surveys showing that most companies are actually going toward permanent hybrid work. 2/3 of all companies surveyed are going toward permanent hybrid work. Of the others, some are doing full-time remote work and some are going full-time in the office. And the ones that are going full-time in the office are, I think, making a serious mistake. The employees for the future, what the workforce of the future will look like, is that employees will work in the office maybe 1, 2, maximum 3 days, usually closer to 1 day on average, maybe 2 days if they really need to be there. Doing collaborative tasks. That's what you really should be doing in the office, only collaborative tasks. That's the activities that are on the average best done in person, especially the more intense collaborative tasks, whereas your individual tasks are best done remotely. In your home office or wherever you are, 2 to 4 days, closer to 4 days for most folks, should be spent on their individual tasks at their home office or wherever they prefer to work. And some will work remotely full-time in these companies. And most of these companies that are going to hybrid, they will have some people who work remotely full-time. Those who do more individual tasks, those who are more successful doing individual work. So that is the future. How do you make the transition to that future? That's a really difficult question. This is nothing that has been done before, where lots of companies at the same time are making the transition. Of course, some have done so. So we can use best practices from those, and we can use extensive research that has been done on how companies have done so effectively, including my own research. I've helped 14 companies by now transition strategically back to the office. And so this is based on extensive external research as well as my own practical experience. You want to conduct an anonymous survey on preferences, so to get employee buy-in, to make sure that they feel that their voices are heard and that you know what they actually want. And you want to offer options. Offer an option of fully remote, which will include, of course, a quarterly team building retreat to maintain company culture, team cohesion, hybrid options of 1 to 3 days per week in the office. You choose one. You want 1 day in the office, 2 days in the office, 3 days in the office, and then full-time in the office for 5 days, Monday through Friday. Most employees, I can guarantee to you, will prefer hybrid in the large majority of companies. That's what we clearly see. External surveys show the same thing. So there's a lot of very strong data that most people will prefer hybrid. Something like usually 2/3 in surveys, and maybe something like a quarter to a third will prefer the remote work, and then maybe 10 to 15% will prefer full-time and office work in most companies. And of course, your mileage may vary. So the fit that's best for most companies will be a hybrid first model, with most employees being hybrid, with some working full-time remotely. Now, employees who work remotely really prefer this hybrid model based on extensive surveys, and data on productivity supports telework. It shows that people are quite a bit more productive on average doing work at home than in the office, 10 to 14% more productive, and even more productive on their individual tasks, which kind of makes sense because they're not distracted by others. They don't have to have that commute, which is the number one complaint of people who don't want to be in the office. So we also know that employees feel happier, less stressed, more engaged, and that they have better work-life balance. All of those categories are really important ones for employees if they have substantial remote work capacity. So not coming into the office more than a day or two a week. Now, the best practices on returning to the office from this extensive research is first providing broad but flexible guidelines for your team leads, and then letting them lead the effort. Don't, from the perspective of the top leadership, you should not say, here's what everyone is going to do. You should give broad guidelines and then let the team leaders who lead the teams of your rank and file employees, so those lower level supervisors, determine what works best for their teams. And it should be based on the balance between their individual tasks and their collaborative tasks. Again, collaborative tasks are usually, for the more intense ones, better done in the office. The ones that are less intense collaborative tasks, that's a wash. You can do them in the office or at home, and individual tasks are much better done at home. So that's what you want to be thinking about. That's the guidance that you give your team leads in order to make the decisions. Now, what about that full-time remote work? So we have that hybrid option for most employees, and I mentioned that some should work full-time remotely. Now, the full-time remote work, who should do so? Well, only people who can be effective and successful should do so. And that involves people who are self-starters, who take initiative, who can make their own way, and who can be disciplined working at home. Those are the folks who you want to encourage to work full-time remotely. So support them working full-time remotely. Even if the rest of their team works hybrid, even if the team lead decides, well, we're going to work hybrid, still in the large majority of cases, you want to permit those folks, if they can be successful working remotely, to work remotely, and encourage the team leaders to permit them to work remotely. Now, they would come into the office to maintain their team culture for a team building retreat once a quarter, which you should be having anyway for all team members. So that's what the full-time remote workers would be. Now, you'll face, I can guarantee to you from my experience, significant resistance from team leads. Team leads tend to really prefer to be in the office quite a bit more than their employees. Now, common reasons for this resistance to hybrid and especially full-time remote work arrangements for the employees who are led by these team leads, so for the team members, included personal discomfort with remote work by the team leaders. Team leaders really do feel uncomfortable. They tend to have a personal preference for having in-office activities, and they feel a loss of control, a loss of oversight, a loss of engagement with their employees. Now, that is all due to some unfortunate mental blind spots called cognitive biases. And if you've checked out the Wise Decision Maker show, you know that we talk about cognitive biases a lot. These are mental blind spots. They cause us to make really bad decisions, whether it's on returning to the office or other areas. There are, in particular, 2 cognitive biases that you'll need to address to make sure that your return to the office is effective and does not face problematic resistance from team leads who'll say, all of my employees should work Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. That's a bad idea. You do not want that. So, 2 cognitive biases. One is called the status quo bias, where we tend to orient toward what makes us comfortable because we're used to it. The status quo, we want to get back to it, to whatever we perceive as the status quo if we've shifted from it, or maintain it if it's there right now. That's one of these cognitive biases. The other cognitive bias is called the anchoring bias. The anchoring bias. We're anchored to our initial experiences, even if those disruptions happen that should cause us to reassess our initial experiences. So supervisors, those team leads, they've been successful for many years, 10, 20 years, 30 years in their career through in-office environments and in-office management of teams, where they have those people they can see, they can have that direct supervision, direct control, direct engagement, direct oversight. They feel successful with that. And they do not feel that they can succeed nearly as well if they don't have those team members under their oversight. And that's a big problem. So both that status quo bias and the anchoring bias cause team leads to make bad decisions. In order to overcome these cognitive biases caused by team leads, you want to treat remote work as the default. That should be the default. So in order to overcome these cognitive biases, that's why you should have that remote work as the default and only come to the office for specific collaborative activities. So you want to justify any time in the office. And that might be 1 day a week, can be justified by coordinating the team, making sure that everyone's on the same page and having a meeting. So 1 day a week for hybrid workers should be the default for hybrid work. And that doesn't mean the whole day. That means coming in for a team meeting, maybe spending a few hours and then going home to do their individual tasks. Any larger activities, projects, brainstorming, and so on that you want, those of course are additional collaborative activities for which you can come in more often. But you want to justify that as opposed to having that as a default. What about people who say, well, we want more than 3 days, that 1 to 3 days, that's not sufficient? That should really be a red flag. That's likely people falling into a cognitive bias because, most of the tasks that you're doing are unlikely to be intense collaborative tasks that require you to be in the office. So you should really justify that very strongly. You should make sure that your team leads who are trying to force people back into the office for more than 3 days, justify that especially strongly. They should definitely justify anything over 1 day, but anything that's over 3 days should be not simply strongly justified, but also compensated, like overtime work, so that there's a financial motivation that their budgets would be hit if they have people in the office for more than 3 days a week. Well, that's the team-led approach for the best return to office plan. So you want to make sure to use this team-led approach where you provide those broad but flexible guidelines while also educating the team leads on these cognitive biases and having those specific default options as well as financial options, financial incentives to allow most of your employees to be home for the large majority of the time when they'll be most productive on average. All right, well, I hope you've benefited from this episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. Please subscribe to whatever channel you've checked out this episode on. We have YouTube, the videocast version, we have iTunes and so on, the podcast version. And please leave your comments and thoughts. I'd love to hear them. Please email them to gleb@disasteravoidanceexperts.com. Again, gleb@disasteravoidanceexperts.com. And there'll be much more information about the topic of the best return to the office in the show notes. So check those out as well. All right, everyone. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. And in the meantime, the wisest and most profitable decisions to you, my friends.